Today's session is governance and reporting on projects. Sounds innocuous, sounds maybe a little bit dry, but I promise you it's neither of those things. Governance is so important on projects, and having projects that have no governance is, really an obvious problem. It's one of those things where when it's working well, you don't notice it, and when you don't have it, it's a real proper disaster. Reporting goes with governance because this is how we support good governance. We ensure information is flowing through the organisation. What you'll learn today are some of the elements that make up governance, the role of the Project Management Office in supporting good governance on projects, the importance of clear, regular and transparent status reports and other information that's flowing through the project, the natural tension that exists between having a good governance and a standardised process, consistent governance framework for all projects, and what we've been referring to in several sessions as subsidiarity, a management term that means to delegate to the lowest possible level of competence and enable people to exercise some intelligent disobedience. And we'll look at commander's intent, which is how the military enables intelligent disobedience in their context. Finally, some of the decision-making and delegation frameworks that support good, fast decisioning. The overlap with the Project Management Body of Knowledge Guide, the PMBOK, is around the measurement performance domain. There are a couple others that overlap, in particular stakeholders, but this one I think has the most overlay. Measurement is about measuring project performance and taking corrective action to stay on track. You know it's working well when at any given point in time, you or your sponsor knows if your project is in strife and needs support. If you have actionable data to base your decisions on, data coming up to you from your team or flowing from you up to your sponsor, so that people who are in decision-making roles can make those decisions based on reliable data. Actions taken to keep the project on track, keep it in alignment with organisational strategy, and you can reliably forecast final cost and completion date. So the forecasting function we talked about in session 3 on cost. I'll refer to session 3 a little bit today, and this is where taking the forecasts that we have generated using earned value management and other techniques, that we are reporting that honestly. It involves establishing performance indicators, KPIs, for whatever you care about on your project, whatever is important. If schedule is important, then we need KPIs to indicate that we are on schedule. We have that with EVM, earned value management. Metrics for cost, indicators for cost. We have that too out of earned value management. So schedule and cost variance as good indicators that our project is on track. But what about things like stakeholder satisfaction, quality and safety and other things we care about? Making sure we have metrics for measuring and reporting on whether we're on track with those other things too. Presenting all this information in useful charts, reports and dashboards. And today we'll look at some of the role of AI and tools in supporting that compilation of data and representing data in useful ways in real time. Troubleshooting performance on the project, so taking corrective actions where we find we have deviated from the plan, and communicating information to support continuous learning and improvement. All right, governance, project governance. I think it's a useful practice to take a look at multiple definitions of something like governance, which is complex. It's quite conceptual for people. So in order to understand it, we'll look at some theoretical explanations, but then we're actually going to have someone from the delivery office come and join us and walk us through what it looks like under the hot sun of EES projects. And hopefully in breathing life into these concepts in that way, you have a better understanding of what governance means. Being a visual learner, I like to visualize governance as a little bit like a mothership. with tethers coming out from the mothership to our projects. So if the mothership is EES, the performing organisation as we call it, if that business as usual environment has reporting structures and management structures in place, then a project, which is a temporary organisation that floats outside of BAU, maybe pulls together people from across that organisational structure to collaborate temporarily, from outside our organisation with our delivery partners, our contractors, their subcontractors, the volunteers, all of these people collaborating as a temporary organisation. We need some way to connect this temporary entity with the mothership. That's governance. So I visualize it as like a rope or something that ties this project back to the mothership of EES. And that channel, that connection of governance, is a channel through which information, decisions, authority, and funding are flowing down from the mothership into our project. And through those same channels, we have information, issue escalation, and updates coming back up to the decision-making bodies of EES. We need to document what this tether looks like, this governance structure for the project, because it is by definition going to be different to the reporting structures that exist in the mothership in EES. Your standard business as usual governance structures where you have line managers and directors and executive directors and up to CEOs and boards, all of that exists in business as usual. But over here, it is definitely going to be different because we have somebody who may report to a line manager in business as usual, who on this project reports to a project manager from a different department or even a different organisation if they come from one of your partner delivery partners. So we need to map out what the governance structure is here in this temporary organisation. What we don't want is our projects floating too far away from the mothership and losing that oversight, because projects can go feral. So we don't want projects going feral. We want to have these clear channels of authority, oversight, decision-making and funding coming down to projects. It requires also that we have reliable, honest and accurate information flowing back up through that channel so that the decision makers can make an informed decision at any time. So let's take a look at some of those different definitions of governance. I've drawn three perspectives: an Australian perspective, a UK and a US perspective. The Australian National Audit Office is the group that audits major projects in Australia. And in their website, this publication updated in 2019, so fairly current, they talk about governance as being systems and processes in place that shape, enable and oversee the management of an organisation. And we can put brackets temporary organisation because we're talking about projects. I also like this addition that they've included in this update that talks about the interplay of the hard attributes of governance, like a project board and or steering committee, as it's called at EES, and the soft attributes of governance, like culture. We'll talk about both of those today, both being critical to ensure good governance and organisational performance. So A&AO pointing to some of the hard structures and some of the softer structures, people and culture. In the UK, the Association for Project Managers is the peak body for project management there. And in one of their publications, they define governance as what ensures that an organisation's project portfolio is aligned to the organisation's objectives and delivered well. So for the APM, they're talking about making sure that every project and program that we do as an organisation continues to remain aligned with the current corporate strategy and our strategic goals of BAU. So we have a corporate strategy in BAU, and sometimes that strategy changes. It does change regularly, periodically, it will change. And what we want to do is make sure that all of the projects, all of the work that we're doing across the organisation remain aligned with those new current goals. So if, for example, we have a corporate strategy around digitizing work, moving things into an online environment so that we can enable remote working and collaboration and other things, well, that's great. But all those projects that we were doing that are about bricks and mortar facilities that support face-to-face service delivery or collaboration, those projects may now need to change and morph to enable the digitization strategy, or even be stopped because they're now off strategy. We don't want to be investing in the bricks and mortar facilities if the strategy has moved to an online delivery model. They also talk about governance supporting the board and other major project stakeholders with timely, relevant, and reliable information. And I think reliable can get missed in all of those words there, but I want to draw that out because it is harder than it looks to provide reliable information. The Project Management Institute in America, who publishes the PMBOK Guide, in the 7th edition of the PMBOK, it talks about governance being the framework for directing and enabling an organisation through established processes, practices, and other relevant documentation. No mention of people, culture, strategic alignment even. So it's interesting that PMBOK's phrased it that way. They're really focusing on the structural components of governance and the documentation. Yeah, possibly an incomplete vision of governance, I would argue. But between the three of them, hopefully you're getting a sense that governance is about making sure our projects don't go feral, that we stay on strategy, they stay relevant to the organisation, they remain a worthy investment, they're supported, we've got good oversight as to what's going on in all these temporary organisations floating outside the mothership. And so that when those projects come to an end and they're ready to transition back into BAU, as in the products, services and results that we were creating out here in project land, that they are transitioned back into BAU through change management. And when they arrive in BAU, they are useful and we're ready to hit the ground running with them. They add value and they create our long-term outcomes. So what are the 4 elements of project governance? It's not just people. Sometimes people think of project governance as just a bunch of people who give you information and decisions. That is one of 4. The first part is structural. So structure means the entities that exist in your organisation that provide that governance role. So it could be a PMO, Project Management Office. It could be a change control board. It could be a stakeholder advisory board. It could be a dispute avoidance board. Project governance groups. There's lots of words for these different entities that can provide governance to projects. Composition means the individuals who will sit on those boards and structural entities. So the individuals who perform governance. Process is all your methodology and documentation. So the project management methodology, EES has an organisational project management methodology called the delivery methodology. So that is an artefact of governance. Any manuals, protocols, procedures, policies, terms of reference, all of these documents are providing governance, because when I procure a subcontractor, I'm doing it in accordance with organisational policy for procurement. And in that sense, that document is guiding my decisions and my behaviour as a PM. And the sign-off of some documents authorise me as a PM to conduct certain activities like procurement, and to do it in a way that's in line with the organisation's priorities and approved way of doing things. So it's governing me. Finally, the data, the information that's flowing through projects and back up and from EES, be it business as usual, the mothership. When it works well, governance essentially is enabling good decision making on projects. The biggest decision of all being our go, no-go decisions. So if you imagine the project life cycle with all of its phases, to go from one phase to another, like from planning to implementation, we need to go through a phase gate. So this is an opportunity for the project to do a certain amount of work and no more until there's a decision made by your governance representatives that yes, this project is still a good investment for us, it's going in the direction that we want, we'll let it through that gate and open up the next portion of work, the next stage. Some industries call this a go, no go, because if strategy has changed or the project's not performing well, or for whatever reason, the cost benefit analysis doesn't stack up anymore, the cost of doing this project is not outweighed by the benefits of doing it. For any of those reasons, we may need to stop the project and it would be a no-go. Other organisations I've seen this called a stop, change, continue decision. Do we stop the project here? Do we let it continue on as it is, or do we make a substantial change to the scope? Some of the other standards and processes that are used or that are influenced by governance that governance enables: change control. So this is not change management. Change management appears further down the list, but change control, or integrated change controls, its full title, this is about managing changes to your project in a controlled way. So for example, if somebody proposes a scope change, then this is the process by which we have that change approved or rejected. So rather than having scope creep, where people go, oh, okay, yep, let me get on that and just start working on it, meaning that we have less project time and less project money to do what is in scope because we're working on all this stuff that's out of scope. Rather than have scope creep, we've got a process in place to recognise it as a change request, analyse its impact on schedule, budget, contracts, risk, quality, make a decision to include it or not, and record who made that decision. It's also a mechanism by which we get additional funding and a time extension, a schedule extension, if that scope change requires additional time and money. Governance can also affect your management of money. So for example, financial delegations, empowering individuals to spend money and approve contracts. Use of contingency, access to management reserves, for example. Risk management, making sure that we're escalating up to the sponsor any risks or issues that are outside the project manager's remit or ability to influence. And so they're being managed appropriately at the program level, or even higher, up to enterprise risk level. We have those three major levels of risk management in place: project, program, enterprise. Reporting, of course, is a major part of governance, so making sure that people have access to current and relevant information that they need, that we're reporting regularly, that the format and content of those reports is right, not too little and not too much. Contract, vendor management, change management. We'll talk about change management in a dedicated session, but change management is a kind of stakeholder engagement, but specifically targeting the people of the performing organisation, EES in this case. Preparing those people, preparing the people on the mothership for whatever changes are about to be implemented as a result of your project. Project audits, reviews, making sure we've got independent eyes on the project, an independent view, which can help us get around some of the issues with reporting that we might see. Okay, so what are some of the documents that support governance? What artifacts will you see as a project manager and that you might need to create that, that document the governance and make sure that it's working well? The organisation breakdown structure maps out who reports to whom in the project in this temporary organisation. The project manager reporting up to a steering committee chaired by the sponsor, or maybe just to the sponsor. Maybe you don't need a steering committee. The line coming out the top of one and in the bottom of another indicates a direct reporting relationship. In other words, the project manager is taking direction, taking instruction from the steering committee. They're authorised by that body. If a line comes out the side, then it indicates that it's not a direct reporting relationship, that entity is not instructing or directing the entity below, but there is a level of governance happening there. In this case, because the line is coming out above the point of the project manager, this would indicate that the project management office initiates contact with the PM. In effect, kind of knocks on the door of the PM and says, okay, we're going to do a review, or we want this report in this format, or whatever else that the PMO requires to do its role. Where the line comes out below the level of the project manager, this would indicate a supportive PMO role, and they don't insist or instruct the PM, but they're available if the PM needs anything. So the project manager would knock on the door of the PMO and request a template or a training program for a team member or whatever else they need, but only if they choose. So what you're looking at with an OBS is a hierarchy chart documenting the project's governance structure, the reporting relationships and lines of authority within the team and above the team. Below that level of project manager, you can have externals that's sitting there as well. So you might have in each box be a person's name or an organisation or a group like volunteers. Another document where you might see governance documented is the terms of reference for a steering committee or project board. Steering committee is the same thing as a project board, by the way. They're just two terms used that mean the same thing. The terms of reference is a document that outlines the roles and responsibilities of each steering committee member and the chair of the steering committee, which is the sponsor. It outlines how they operate, so when they meet, how they make decisions, how many form a quorum, how their decisions will be documented, how people come and go from that committee, who appoints them, how they're authorised. And another document you might see is the delegations manual. Now, I don't think EES actually has one of these, but this is the document that records the authorisation of whoever is performing project work. It's a mechanism for delegation. The sign-off of a brief or a project charter, and then the sign-off of a project management plan. The approval of that, which documents the name of the project manager, that is a mandate for that project manager. That is the delegation mechanism. In signing that, you are authorising the PM to expend organisational resources, including their own time, doing this project. And also through that mechanism be approving financial delegations, although in some cases that is done separately through a financial delegations process. There are a few considerations here as well. Minimum viable governance. This is a phrase that is circulating across industry at the moment, private and public sector, and it reflects this tension between having a governance framework like a methodology, the delivery methodology, having a governance framework that standardizes how everybody does things, so nobody can drift too far and do something too weird and waste too much money or go and brief the media with no approval, to really standardize and have a consistent way of doing projects that leverages best practice and what we know works at, for us as for EES. But balancing that with empowering people to exercise their own initiative and judgment in circumstances where the standard approved process just doesn't really work here, or it's not sensible this time to do it that way. So what is minimum viable governance? If you undercook the governance, if it's too light, then people can go and do those kind of feral things, and maybe with the best of intentions, just not aware of why that decision is doesn't make sense. If you've got it too light, that's going to be a problem. But if your governance structure is too heavy, then people just spend all their time reporting to all these different bodies and different information that they like to see it customized this way, and I like it formatted like this, and I prefer a PowerPoint. And so you're just constantly preparing packs and documents for people. And therefore the team has no time to go and do the work that we're supposed to be reporting on. So yeah, there is a balance there between standardization, consistency, and getting on with the work. We also need a structure that enables people to deviate from the normal approach if it makes sense to do so on this occasion. And this is called intelligent disobedience. It's breaking with policy or procedure or not following the delivery methodology because this time it's safer or it's much more cost effective, or for whatever reason it's more practical to this time do it differently. So you're enabling people to break with something that cannot be perfect for all projects. One of the characteristics of projects we've already explored is that they're unique. That's why we can't use standard operating procedures to run projects, because every project is unique. We need to come up with a unique project management plan for all of these unique bits of work. So how do you create a delivery methodology, a governance framework that's going to be, one size fits all of the time? You can't. There needs to be a mechanism for intelligent disobedience. However, it needs to be done within guardrails that keep the individual safe, that they're not going to lose their job because they didn't follow policy, and it's sort of, that infuriating utopia style, following the bouncing ball and complying, to the T with something that's written, just so that you don't ever get in trouble. So that's intelligent disobedience is enabling us to deviate from the bureaucracy and get through the red tape, but in a way that doesn't punish the person for doing so. So they've still got oversight, they've got the right approvals to deviate, but they can deviate. Subsidiarity is the third area, very much related to both of these. And subsidiarity is a management term that refers to delegating to the lowest possible level of competence. So if somebody is competent, they're a technical expert in the work, then we should be able to empower that person to make the decisions. Or if you're working in an environment that's changing rapidly, it's a volatile, complex, ambiguous, and uncertain VUCA. It's a VUCA environment, and the plan that we write, it's going to be obsolete, the first day that we try to implement it, because things are going to change so rapidly. So this is something that enables the person who's leading that work package to improvise and to not follow the plan, in a very rigid and prescribed way if that plan has become out of date and no longer relevant, or there's a better way. Conditions on the ground have changed and it makes more sense to go this way now, not that way. So subsidiarity. And this is practiced in the military through something called commander's intent. So commander's intent is the military's version of subsidiarity, their interpretation of it. What commander's intent involves is having the commander, in our case, translates as the sponsor, explain the outcome as best as they can. This is what we're trying to achieve here. We want farmers to manage land sustainably in a way that encourages native species to thrive. Okay, that's what success looks like. So painting that picture in as rich a way as possible from multiple perspectives, really giving people a solid understanding of what is intended. But then recognizing the chaos, the lack of complete information, the fact that our environment is going to change and it's volatile, rapid changes in the situation, conditions on the ground, the fact that that's going to make our plan obsolete when it's executed. In providing that picture of what success looks like, you're really giving a North Star to the team and saying, as long as we get there, you can deviate from the plan within an allowable spectrum of improvisation. So they actually call it a spectrum of improvisation, where they'll run through multiple models of how we might get there. So the commander might say, The outcome is I want you to take the hill. The plan is that we're going to do this and this and this and this and this. But when you get into the field and you can't escalate to me for every decision as you're running through the ground, then how might else it work? You might take this route, or you might go over there, or you might go under there. So you'll run through a variety of scenarios, and the commander will comment on which would be permissible, which ones they are off the table, which ones they would need to have a quick check-in and get approval if that happened. And that's your guardrails. So this spectrum of improvisation provides the guardrails for breaking with policy or methodology, where you don't have time to get that decision from the commander in a way that protects you. Now, the PMO, just so you're aware, there's no standard definition of what it is, what it does, what services it could and should provide. There are no standards nationally. There are no standards internationally. There's a group called the AIPMO, which is not the AIPM. The Australian Institute of Project Management is our peak body for project management in Australia, and the AIPMO is the Alliance of International Project Management Offices, and it's based in Switzerland. This organisation, AIPMO, has created some practice guides and compiled research about project management office roles and what that entity typically does or might do in different sectors. But still, we don't have a competency standard or a standardised view of what the entity does. I also want to call out a myth that you might have heard before, which is that the average shelf life of a PMO is 2 years. Now, every 2 years, the PMOs are disbanded and at some later point reintroduced. And it was always an argument that they don't demonstrate value, that they're not a worthy investment, and so they got rid of after 2 years on average, and then eventually somebody else brings one back in. If you've heard this before, this is actually not true. It's a myth. The AIPMO investigated this saying because it became quite common to hear this stuff being talked about. So they investigated it and found the author of the original research that coined the myth, and the original researcher himself said that's not what was intended and that's not what the research meant. It's sort of been misquoted, and what they were intending in the research was that every couple of years a PMO refreshes itself and Phoenix style rebrands, reinvents what it does, how it's supporting the organisation, which makes a lot of sense when you consider that one of the primary functions of a PMO is to uplift the capability of the organisation. And if you are maturing, then every couple of years you wouldn't want to be offering the same services or the same templates or the same tools, that you would have risen the tide, as so to speak, of the maturity in which people are delivering their projects, the tools they want to use, and so you would be wanting to offer a whole new set of services that support an organisation operating at a high level of capability and maturity. So that's what the research was talking about, a refresh, not that it's disbanded. So what does a PMO typically do? Well, they facilitate project governance. That's their main job, to make sure that the projects that the organisation invests in stays connected to the performing organisation and that those projects are done well. I sometimes refer to the PMO as the projects department, as though you've got finance and HR and legal, and then there's a projects department. We just call it the PMO or something similar. So they make sure that we have transparent, honest, accurate reporting. They help develop and mandate or implement the processes and methodologies that project managers need to comply with. They can facilitate execution by providing metrics and reports. They can collate risks and issues, provide quality audits, and use some of the tools like quality controls, control charts, and radar charts and some of the things we looked at in quality, they can put together that data and provide that back to project managers with some insights about what it might mean for their project. They do have a function around enhancing capability, similar to what the delivery of Office is doing through this course, training, building knowledge, building skills and confidence, connections and internal networks of project managers so that people operate more competently as project managers. They also help to share lessons learned. So because the PMOs across all the projects that are happening, they can take a lesson learned from one part of the organisation, bring it into the hub, and then disseminate it from there onto relevant similar project work so that we're not learning lessons the hard way by repeating issues on multiple projects, but rather we're sharing those lessons learned. Finally, they can support in the performance of certain project tasks. So some PMOs create the schedule for project managers. The project managers will come into the PMO, workshop the project plans. The PMO will do the scheduling, the budgeting. They might do the business case for certain projects. They might execute procurement for projects. There are many words for this entity. It could be a project management office. The P could stand for project or program or portfolio. The project office without the management, delivery office, as you call it, an enterprise project or program or portfolio management office, or a EP3MO, sounds like a Star Wars character, but the EP3MO is the enterprise project program and portfolio management office, and so on. Doesn't really matter what it's called. But there are three basic types for this entity. There's a supportive PMO, which is one that is there when the project managers want to knock on the door and request some help. They can provide advice, they can assist in communication, they can recommend a training program. Facilitative means they're helping you do project activities, providing specific services like scheduling. And directive, meaning they design the methodology and direct the project managers as to how to move through project lifecycle, what that governance framework is. So they mandate it, and project managers are required to comply with whatever that policy and management methodology is. There's an argument, though, that project management offices cost a lot of money and maybe we don't get as much value back. I think a little bit like risk and governance itself, that when it goes well, nobody notices it. But when things go badly, we're really aware that if that entity had been there, that this very expensive problem wouldn't have happened. So during implementation, how do we make sure that the information is getting to the right people at the right time with the right impact and supporting good decisioning? This is about information flow, and we use status reports as the main mechanism for communicating up, reporting up and communicating out and down. So we do use those two terms purposefully. Report goes up the chain, communicate goes out and down the chain. But status reports are supporting this information flow, but increasingly this is being done through automation and AI. And we'll look at this in a bit, but PMOs are bringing in these tools like Space and then overlaying that with programs and AI software or apps that can actually interrogate the data lake, as it's called. So when you've got all these bits of data floating in a centralized system, it's called the data lake, and you can start to draw out of that in an automated and in real time information that is going to replace status reports eventually. As long as the data is inputted in an honest and timely way, then you can use the robots to pull it out. For now, we have project managers usually creating these status reports, reporting up to a sponsor around progress of work. Remembering we keep this fairly high level, they are having to read a lot of status reports, so keep it brief. They don't want war and peace over the technical work of what you're doing. They want to know how things are going, what milestones you've passed, Are you on budget? Are you on schedule? You may find yourself using earned value metrics like EAC and BAC to do some of that reporting. Any issues that they should be aware of? Quality they usually want to know. How is the product going to be fit for purpose? They are accountable for the achievement of benefits, so that the product that your project's creating needs to be fit for purpose, so that when they go to use it, they're able to achieve those benefits or outcomes. Emerging risks, opportunities. Meanwhile, communicating down to the team in all that information the team is going to know. They do want war and peace. They want war and peace, all the detail you've got about how you want them to do their work. The task description, the objectives for them, the time frames you want them to deliver by, the budget they've got to work within, the risks at their levels. No point you knowing about a risk that you haven't communicated to the person at the coalface of the work. So in various industries, they package this up and they might call it a particular name. In one industry, they call it a DID, a data item description. Doesn't really describe what it is. It's just like a mini project plan that goes down to the work package manager with all the data, all the information they're going to need to do that job well. Communicating out to stakeholders, what's in it for them, how they're impacted, any change management activities they can expect. Constantly open to feedback loops from stakeholders. And meanwhile, the team is going to report up to the project manager. Similar information to what the project manager is reporting up to the sponsor, but about their work only. Percent complete of tasks, mini milestones achieved, actual costs, so what hours have been banked and need to be covered as paid for under labour cost, risks, issues emerging in the work package level, opportunities at the work package level. So status reports, being this standard reporting mechanism, are a really important document. Traffic light reports are a fairly common mode of communicating status for various things. For the schedule, we could give it a red, amber, green status. For the overall project, a red, amber, green. Issues, red, amber, green. But what do these colours actually mean? Apart from the fact that there's an unfortunate use of red, has connotations of anger and emergency and disaster, and who wants to be attached to that? So, there's a bit of a psychological moment of courage needed to put a red on your work. So setting that aside, red should mean off plan, and I'm not coming back to green without external help. So red really should be white, like a white flag, like come and help me. I need some help over here. Making it red is a deterrent, I think. People feel ashamed or embarrassed or nervous about making things red, like they're not a good project manager. Amber means I'm off plan, but I don't need help. I have a plan to return to green and without external assistance. So I've got this, it's off plan now, but we expect to return to green without external assistance. And green meaning on plan, on budget, on schedule. Quality of deliverables is per our acceptance criteria and so on. You might need to consider your audience when you use things like traffic lights. Is it culturally relevant? Are people able to use them? A lot of issues with colour blindness and RAG reporting. Red, amber, green means nothing to somebody with red, green colour blindness. You have to sometimes put the letter inside the circle, a red with an R, an A and a G inside the other circles. Be very careful of watermelon reporting. So if you've not heard the term, watermelon reports are green on the outside, everything looks fine, red in the middle. And this means that we're not seeing accurate reports going up the chain. And that usually means that you're not finding out about issues until they are harder to deal with, or they're messy and expensive. And what we want is to find out about things as soon as possible if they're not green. A couple of sources of watermelon reports that I just want to pause on for a minute. Delusion and deception in project reporting. Delusion means someone is honestly reporting their honest view about how things are going. It's just that their view is completely delusional. They do not understand that the project is performing worse than they think it is. And this is where a whole lot of psychological biases come in. Optimism bias, that we think that, oh, she'll be right, we'll get there, we'll do it faster this time, or just knock that one over quickly and we'll catch up. The planning fallacy is another bias, which means that we tend to think our project's really special, like our children, really. We think they're so special, but turns out they're not really. They're more or less like every other project out there. And so in the planning fallacy, you're much more likely to come up with an accurate estimate of time and cost when you use what we call reference class forecasting, meaning don't consider your project to be completely unique and special. Look at similar projects that have the same sorts of features, and however long they took, on average, it's a much better estimate than what you're probably going to come up with. Because in considering your project to be unique, we tend to fall into a planning fallacy bias that means that we end up optimistic. So look at the average project like yours, or work package like yours, and take the average from there. Anchor and adjust is another bias that can lead to delusion. Anchor and adjust is where we latch onto an early estimate. Might have been somebody, really early business case stage, just kind of throwing numbers around, sometimes just, what happened to be left over, that happens to be the budget for this project, without really thinking through the work. It just comes from a financial breakdown of parceling money out to everyone, and then that ended up being the budget, but it wasn't determined by consideration of the work at all. So regardless of where the number came from, anchor and adjust bias is where you latch onto that early first number and you don't adjust far from it when you adjust up or down. Okay, so lots of reasons why people might be delusional. Deception is the other source of watermelon reporting, and this is strategic misrepresentation of the project. This is where somebody has a conflict of interest, or for political reasons, they want the project to look like it is performing better than it is. If you think about a contractor who's got a whole lot of revenue tied to phase 2, that contractor might want to make phase 1 look like it's performing really well in order to get that revenue. Or you might have somebody in a position where politically they really want a project to look good because maybe there's an election coming, or there's a restructure on the horizon, so we just want to make our department look like we're performing really well, adding heaps of value, so make everything green, sweep our issues under the rug, and we'll fix them before the next report cycle. So all of these sorts of things come into play. And one interesting angle on the AI story or discussion is that there are some products out there being developed. At least one of them I've actually seen is called Meeting Quality. But what these products do is it uses AI to interrogate the emotive content of emails and Teams messages and Yammer posts and anything that you enter into a corporate system where the organisation has the right to surveil what you've written. It's work product. It belongs to EES. They use these products to capture all of that conversation about the project that's not formal, it's informal. It might be emailing about a meeting that you just held, or putting something into Teams to challenge a view, or just express an opinion about the work or how you're going with the work. But the AI is not looking at the technical explanation, it's looking at the emotive content, meaning for emotionally charged words like concerned or rush or fantastic, future. So these sorts of words would indicate a positive or negative frame of mind, and then they build up automated reports that come back to governance representatives, including the project manager, that says people who are at the coalface of this work, working on the deliverables, the project team, there seems to be a high level of negative words. There seems to be a high level of anxiety, of fear, a bit of anger at that level. And it's contrasting with the language that we're seeing at the senior stakeholder level, which is all about how fantastic this is going to be. There's lots of agency, there's lots of optimism. So it flags as a risk because of the disjoint between the moods of those two people. And either senior managers aren't cascading down to the team why this project is happening and what it's going to be used for. So all that optimism isn't flowing down, or the team isn't able to escalate up the truth about what's actually going on with this project. And so you have that delusion or deception that they're oblivious to the truth of this project, which is that, you know, maybe it's a train wreck. So that the AI will flag any project where there's a disjoint in the emotive content of comms. Interesting. So these types of comprehensive reporting systems are being used, typically with large, high value, high stakes, complex projects. You start to use the tools, use the information that's out there, including tools like Space to use earned value analysis and automate all of that. Produce a graph like this one that at a glance, project managers and sponsors can see how projects are performing, and we can use this in conjunction with more subjective feedback and commentary about the project, descriptions, and also maybe something about how people are feeling, looking at the emotive content of their comms. What I'd like to do now is look at the role of the sponsor, because what the research is showing is that this is a critical role in terms of predicting project success. Now, in the same way that we talked about accidental project managers in session 1, that it's really common to see project managers who trained in something else, they're an expert in something else, they go up the ladder till they get senior enough to be given a project that makes them a project manager, but they often aren't trained in the role of the project manager. The same thing happens with sponsors. You may have an accidental sponsor who is performing the role but hasn't actually been trained in the role. Noting too that this is an ill-defined role. So like a PMO, there's very few competency standards out there about what this role actually involves. I'll come back to that idea in a minute. But the point of pointing that out is to say that you may need to lead up. You may need to educate your project manager, your sponsor, about how to support you best and what you need from them as a sponsor. You might need to do it in a delicate way too, because they should know how to do that role, or at least they might think that they should already know how to do it. It's a bit of a stigma, I suppose, with training sponsors, which I've encountered before. Okay, this is recent research. This is a 2020 study done by KPMG looking at drivers of project success, and found that having an engaged senior sponsor, senior stakeholders, has a significant positive impact on the likelihood of project success. In fact, it was the second highest predictor of success after communication. So we know that it's important. We know that it is a predictor of project success. If we look at organisations that do well, and there's only 25% of organisations out there that we'd want to really look at closely. This is 25% of organisations who are doing successful projects most of the time and are deemed high performing by KPMG. What are these organisations doing differently? What are they doing in common that makes them high performing? Turns out 3/4 of that cohort have actively engaged project sponsors who are trained in the role. They also have a clearly documented roles and responsibilities for sponsor. So it's written down what they should be doing. There's an EPMO that helps provide information to that sponsor in an objective way. And there's a mechanism in place to continuously improve project sponsorship. Project sponsors, even at the highest level of the organisation, are performance reviewed based on how well they are sponsoring the projects. So projects, programs, and project portfolios work together in order to deliver the corporate plan, deliver change, and deliver the long-term outcomes that the organisation has set out to achieve. Project management is all about making sure that we deliver the project objectives, create products, services, results in an efficient way. Achieve your objective on time and on budget. That's your job as a project manager. The core themes here are around project management, the technical management tasks like scoping and scheduling and budgeting and risk, and project leadership, the people side. So managing, leading your team, communicating the vision, engaging the stakeholders, being persuasive. So between the management and leadership of a project, we are delivering that project on time and on budget with a fit for purpose product to a satisfied set of stakeholders. That's great project management. Project sponsorship, that function is about making sure that the projects we efficiently deliver are the right projects to do to achieve the project outcomes that we're looking for, those long-term outcomes laid out in your program logics. The focus here is around benefits realisation, which you use your monitoring, evaluation and reporting frameworks to enable. Project resourcing, funding the projects, resourcing them. Stakeholder management, particularly at senior levels. That's why great sponsors are ones that have political clout, and networks within the organisation. Governance, providing key decisions, monitoring and responding to threats at the program level. And then we have portfolio management. So the three functions: project management, sponsorship, and portfolio management, where portfolio management goes all the way back to the opening of this session, making sure that the projects and programs we invest in as a business are all aligned with corporate goals and current corporate strategy, and that we're getting a return on investment from those projects. So it's about evaluating all the hundreds and thousands of things we could do as an organisation and selecting and prioritising the few that we are going to do. Who's performing these functions? We have a project manager with a really clear role around project management. A sponsor is doing the project sponsorship bit. The portfolio management sits with someone from BAU holding that accountability for a portfolio and the budget delegation. Now, where you have multiple projects packaged into a program, because the program is there to achieve outcomes, that all of the projects in combination will work together to achieve the outcome. No single project in the program can achieve the outcomes all on its own. It's the combination of them that deliver the set of outcomes we're looking for. And by managing them as a program, we can track those outcomes in a coordinated way rather than tracking them 9 times at the project level. We roll that up and track it efficiently at the program level. So you may have a program manager who is the project sponsor for all of the projects within the program, and then that program manager would report up to a program sponsor. If there are other perspectives needed, you would form a steering committee or a project board, as Lawrence was calling it this morning. This board, this group of people, enables the governing body, the body that provides decisions, direction, advice, guidance to the project manager. That body is picking up multiple perspectives that we need to have. For example, the sponsor might be the one contributing the bulk of the funds. They're accountable for the benefits, but we might also want to hear from the people who are going to actually use the asset on the ground in operations later. So we might invite somebody from that group to participate on the board. Or if we've got a major delivery partner from industry, we might get somebody from that organisation to be on the board. These other people may not have decision-making authority, but they can have endorse and not endorse authority. So they're providing that advice. The sponsor is the chair of that group, the chair of the board, and should have the final decision-making accountability. If you're accountable for the benefits, then you should have the authority to make that final decision. Role that I want to look closely at, that you might need to educate up about. I mentioned before that there's not too much guidance out there around the role of the project sponsor. This is a fairly new model, new definition of what a project sponsor should be doing. It was developed by the Global Alliance for the Project Professions, the GAPS, and has been adopted by the Australian Institute of Project Management. This forms the competency standard that the Australian Institute of Project Management uses to award the Certified Practicing Project Sponsor certification. Hot off the press, in fact, I don't think it's even available yet, but They have endorsed the standard and will be releasing certifications for sponsors shortly. So this is what that international working group came up with, that AIPM has now adopted as its definition of the role of the sponsor. And I think it's the first definition that we've had worldwide of this role. The sponsor is responsible for doing three main things in relation to a project. They are accountable for the benefits, so they have to take accountability for the project, make sure it remains justified, make sure it has effective governance in place, and that the benefits that are likely to be achieved, that this project is the right project to do to achieve those long-term benefits or outcomes. They support the project manager. That means being available. So if you've got a sponsor that is too senior, that's across too much, and you just can't get to them when you need an issue resolved or you need support, then it's the wrong sponsor to have. You need somebody lower, or the sponsor should delegate project sponsorship to somebody else. And sometimes you see that happening where you have an executive project sponsor and a project sponsor. The executive has delegated to a project sponsor just so that to take care of the day-to-day. And if there's anything that needs that level of seniority, then it can be escalated to the executive sponsor. So you need to be available. They need to help with senior level stakeholder engagement and conflict resolution, but they also might provide feedback to the project manager on how they could do their role better, a bit of performance feedback. The final area is around supporting the project. So they fund it, they resource it, they make sure that decisions are coming down in a timely way. Some of the behaviours that are helpful or harmful to from project sponsors. It's great when your project sponsor is a role model for the culture that you need on your project. We talk a lot about psychological safety, about valuing diversity, about having transparent and honest reporting. So when you have a senior stakeholder like your project sponsor demonstrating that, it flows down really easily through the team. And when they're modelling the opposite, really hard to get people to adopt those behaviours that you need. Commander's intent or delegation and subsidiary, these are great behaviours demonstrated by a sponsor. What we don't want in our sponsors is slow decision making or no decision making, stuck in the mud with trying to get unanimous agreement from all of the members of the project board. So in their terms of reference, in the role of the sponsor, I recommend that there's only one person who can make that final decision, one approver, as many endorsers as you want, but the project sponsor should be able to say, I'm approving this decision, even though 3 out of 8 of our steering committee did not endorse it. We're going with it. Schismatics decisions is where you're flip-flopping around all over the place. You're providing guidance in this direction, the next day it's that direction, supporting, and then suddenly got a problem with the project that out of the blue. That's very difficult. Shoot the messenger is terrible when sponsors do that. That's what leads to watermelon reporting. Nobody wants to give them an amber or a red because they're afraid that the sponsor is going to either get angry or blame them or climb down and start to get involved with the work and slow everything down, which is called long screwdrivers, if you've ever heard of that saying before. Long screwdrivers is micromanagement from senior project leaders, where you have maybe a sponsor or a steering committee member. It's like they've got a long screwdriver and they're meddling in technical work 3 or 4 levels below them, having a say about how we should do the technical work, because, I don't know, it was their expertise a decade ago, or it's just something they're really interested in, passionate about, so they want to get involved, but they shouldn't be. Their expertise is probably possibly outdated, but also for good governance, we need a separation of delivery team from governing the governance structure. If they're invested in the work too, it's hard for them to make a go, no-go decision when this is their work.